time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, we want to have a little discussion today about just aesthetics in general, particularly within the music equipment range, because now that music equipment has become more accessible to everybody, you can sell a product to a lot more people because you have the pro market and like the consumer market. But what's really interesting is what some of the brands in like the pedal, synth, and even like microphone and guitar / drum instrument range do to stand out, because you can sell a box that makes a sound, or you can sell a very nice looking box that makes the same sound. But obviously marketing is a lot and people buy with their eyes.
And this is also very true with plugins. We all know that there's plugins that look really good that people like to use, and maybe plugins that don't look that good that could probably be better, but people don't tend to use them because they're, it's either not the name brand, or, some people, just want to have the thing that's, well, they used it, so I want to use it. And I think that's fair, that's what makes music technology and production fun, is feeling like maybe you've tapped into using something that your heroes have used, or maybe it's the complete opposite. Maybe you're like, I've got this thing and it's my secret weapon because nobody is using it. And I think that's very common as well, particularly among guitar players with pedals. Like, people are like, well, I've got this vintage fuzz and there's no way you've got it because it's so rare and by an obscure brand, and they only made like 30 of them. So I think these things can add certain value to you as a music producer or as a gear collector and player, because some people just like to play and just have something where they're like, I've got this and this is mine. But some of our favourite brands that we've noticed, like particularly in the visual realm, I mean, I think every brand we will talk about today will be great in terms of sonic quality, because to be honest, most brands are pretty good for sonic quality, but the visuals can be a bit more of a mixed bag, because you have, your standard sort of does the job, but aesthetically still very pleasing sort of Boss pedals and electro harmonics and stuff. But then you get to brands like Dreadbox.
And Dreadbox have a very sort of focused visual style in the best possible way. They have the sort of the typography and the colours and the choices used. Like, you can have a pedal that's called, X brand distortion or X brand like rocker. Do you know what I mean? That's fine. But when you have something like a Dreadbox disorder, or I was going to say I can never say it right.
Komorebi, I think.
Komorebi.
Probably butchering it, but that's how it looks like it's said.
Treminator, you have these sort of like, they've smashed two words together, or just like the visual aesthetics combined with the name of the pedal.
I mean, it also, like with the Chromatic modular series, they have like Hysteria and Dystopia. And
Nostalgia.
They're all in a sort of theme, and, we're suckers for like a themed product, because it's like one of those things, you want to collect them all. And sometimes, even if you don't want to collect them all, you look at the ones you don't have and you're like, man, imagine if I had them all. It's like, trading cards or anything else that you can collect, there's that thing that ties them all together. And I think it can, as a product manufacturer, it can very much incentivize people to keep buying your products.
Yeah, because when there's a range and there's a series, a bit like you say with like people who collect sort of playing cards, or even like a movie trilogy, there's something about having the trilogy or the full series of a product that's very satisfying. I've been trying to track down a discontinued series by Hurton. And it's called the Skyline series, and there's around 30-ish pedals in there. So there's a lot to get. And they're sort of like a quarter of the size of a normal pedal, but they sound really fun. And they're sort of like a nice budget thing to collect. But they're so hard to find, as some of them in particular, because they've been discontinued, and then a lot of people see them and they get one and they go, I could have like a mini board that's like got 4 pedals the size of 2 pedals. like some people have strapped them to the guitars and put them on their amps before because they're that tiny.
And they do a board, don't they? Is it the Skyboard?
Yes, the Hot Turn Skyboard, which houses 5 Skyline series pedals, which I've never been able to even see for sale, really. And it's just fun. Like the aesthetic, the only thing drawing you to these pedals is that they are tiny.
Yeah, and do you not find as well like the fact that they are available, because we're not talking like Klon Centaur or ridiculous prices, you know, they're in the realms of affordability. I mean, sometimes they're like £20, but like I say, sometimes they're 180. So the value in terms of what the retail worth of these are, the second hand, should I say, worth, is all over the place. But that makes it funner to collect because you can actually get a bargain, you know. It's not like getting a like first generation tone bender or something where you're going to struggle to get that at a, you know, non-collector's price. These are things you can buy with essentially spare change or just floating around money, and they're still satisfying to collect. So you've got most of them, haven't you, already now?
Yeah, I think I'm missing 4 in the range, 4 to 6, depending on if you're classing the 2 loopers as part of it or not, which they're in the same form factor, but they were a little bit sort of separated to me because they're just loopers, so they're not sort of in there. But also, Wally Plus hasn't been discontinued yet either, so they are a little bit more readily available.
Which I do find odd, because you would think if they can make, because is the tuner not discontinued either?
It might not be, no, because I think I saw it brand new on a few shops and it was still in stock and still selling.
So I find it odd that most of the range is discontinued, but a select few, but I suppose that will go based off sales numbers, I would assume.
Yeah, and also like it's nice to have a tiny looper or a tiny tuner. Some of the
utilities.
Effects, like I've got in front of me a Hot Turn EQV, which has 5 bands of EQ on, and if you think that this Hot Turn pedal is maybe as long as 4 knobs on a Boss pedal, I mean, it is like the parameter section of a Boss pedal is the full size of this pedal, and then they fit a 5-band EQ, the jacks in, the power, a level knob, and an on switch in the size that there's like 4 pots on another pedal. It's sort of crazy how small and sort of cute looking these things are, but that is the sales point, like the full reason people go after this series is purely because they are, you know, it's a bit like anything when people see small things, they just go, ooh, it's cute.
It's sort of the opposite of the like Electro Harmonix big box sort of collector mentality. Like this is like a get the smallest, tiniest thing you can get.
But the other thing with the Hot Turn pedals is when shooting them out against other big brands, you know, there's nothing wrong with the sound. They're not cheap sounding pedals.
Some of them are very, like, well, I would say most of them are very, very impressive, but particularly the modulation effects are really, really lush. Well, that is one of them as well. And
yeah. And they have toggles and lots, well, any sort of feature you'd normally have. They all have 3 parameters, and then some of them have 3 modes and 3 parameters in the tiny, tiny form factor. Whereas some pedals just have 1 knob and are a lot bigger. So it's one of those things. But like I say, it's just an aesthetics thing that's very satisfying. Whereas you have a lot of pedals tend to go for bigger boxes because obviously you need space. Like the Hot Turn pedals aren't very good if you're trying to do something at a gig and you go to turn 1 band down and your finger fits on 3 different bands.
Yeah.
You almost need tweezers, like people joke with the boutique series. Like the faders are so small. You need to have tweezers and like pinpoint precision when you're doing automation on like the hardware, because it's so easy to slip or to knock 2 parameters down when using them.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, I think it can, like, depending on what type of music you make, like if you're making like synthwave or retro 80s influenced genres like a lot of people love, like brands like Dreadbox, I mean, how can you say no to something like Hypnosis? Like, we're just looking at a picture on the website at the moment, and God, it just looks so good. And it's like a module, like standalone, but also I believe fits in your Eurorack modular. But it's multi-effects, but they've really just nailed like the aesthetic, like the 80s aesthetic. It's all like magenta and like a tealish, but leaning more towards the green. And it's all sliders as well, which is quite interesting. Like Dreadbox love to do sliders on their Euro rack stuff. I mean, a lot of people use like knobs, but the sliders, it's a visual look. It's a bit like the Hot Tone EQ with the sliders. You know, it really is a choice to use sliders because, you know, they're not a pain to put in because I built a CCTV module that has sliders, one of the mixers, but it takes up a lot of space, I suppose, on the in the GUI, or not the GUI, but just the UI, the user interface, because you know a knob just fits on, boom, you twist it, blah blah blah. Whereas the fader, you know, it's like a console. When you think about consoles like mixing desks, the faders take up a big chunk. You know, I'm just looking at our mixing desk here. And if you replace the faders with like a row of knobs, you'd be able to shave like a couple of inches off the actual size of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because the faders go up from 0 to, well, yeah, from no level to full level, basically. And then if you was to have a row of 16 pots, yeah, you wouldn't need anywhere near as much of the vertical thing, but they would still have the full turn to gain it up. Which is like you say, it's an interesting like choice, but there's something satisfying. Like when anybody who's never been in a recording studio thinks of a recording studio, you would typically imagine sitting in front of a big mixing desk and throwing the faders up, because that's what they tend to do on TV to represent that you are in the studio recording something, because there's nothing visual about a lot of audio recording, but sitting at a desk and having the faders that you can say push 10 up with your 10 fingers, that's not something you typically do most of the time.
Yeah, and it just looks good on TV, doesn't it? It looks good in music videos and in documentaries when they do it. That's why they do it. You know, we was laughing at the Beatles not Get Back.
Then and Now.
The Then and Now behind the scenes, because they're talking about audio restoration and the act of like decoupling the vocals from the piano. And on the screen, it's just a Fab Filter Pro Q3, I believe. And you're like, that's not the same software. It's not even the same category of software. And as we were saying about it looking good on TV, well, it's a reactive EQ. So if you don't know anything about music production, you look at that and it responds to the audio and you think, whoa, that's real clever. But it's not at all what they're actually talking about in the mini documentary.
Yeah, and like we say with aesthetics, like obviously Boss popularized the compact stomp in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Sort of like the prototypes and stuff was going, and then that revolutionized the pedal industry. And mainly what people loved about the Boss pedals was the fact that there was all different colors. That sells products like nothing else, because I mean there's a set of Line 6 19-inch racks called the what's the series? It's just a Pro series, isn't it?
Just a Pro series, as far
which
as
has
I can see.
A filter, a mod, and an echo in. And they're just like, if you watch Butch Vig talking on a classic album documentary, all you're looking at is the three, you have a green, pink, and blue rack behind him. And when it's in a sea of white and black gear, they just stand out. It's what drew me to the Planet Fat on one of the classic albums where DJ Premier's talking, and all you can see is this pink rack behind him and it says Planet Fat, but that's branding that you see it and you go, well, what's that?
Eye-catching. Stands
Whereas
out.
when you have a row of black accents where they all have tiny letters on and there's nothing really to look at, if you don't know what they are, you just go, well, it's just a server rack. That's the power of good visual identity.
And I know that the idea of and the concept of minimalism is also very popular. I mean, look at Ableton. It's one of the most popular DAWs, and nobody would say that is a striking visual DAW in terms of graphic design, because Ableton is as minimal and as uniform as it really can get in terms of software. But it has style in its minimalism. But I think, like in hardware, it's hard because you can get like the Boss pedals are quite minimalist, really. They're just a typeset and a color, and that's all they do. Whereas the Dreadbox stuff offers the opposite, which is, the fonts are just killer, particularly in the chromatic and the newer ranges in general. And, there's something about that because, you could, you saw on eBay, didn't you, like an Orbit where somebody had wiped the graphic off by mistake when they tried to clean it.
Yeah, it was just a blue steel brush instead of having the yellow with the Orbit logo.
Yeah, and, if you did that to all music, equipment, I'm just imagining what Hypnosis would look like if you took all, you just stripped everything off like you was building it fresh.
I suppose it's the same aesthetic as like people's gaming PCs and rigs where they want to input their personality onto the hardware they're using to play games. And it's like taking all the LED strips and neon sort of ribbons out of these gaming PCs and saying there's a black, well, even better, the 90s like beige coloured computer, which are still aesthetically desirable because I've seen new computers with that aesthetic as well.
I think it's come back round. It definitely wasn't cool in 2006 or so.
Yeah,
like when it had just aged out of being the mainstream, it was like the least cool thing you could imagine.
But if you're looking for like a vaporwave sort of aesthetic, that 90s thing has come round. So obviously some people sort of like are nostalgic for that type of computer, which is funny to me. Particularly like I saw on Instagram a picture of one of the high-level gaming PCs with all the neons and stuff and RGB stuff in the middle. But the outer casing was like a 90s awful home PC. And obviously, if you was looking at that, you'd just throw it in the bin, not knowing what was inside.
That's what makes you think, like, with cases like that, you think, well, what about if somebody does just, like, say for some reason somebody has to go through and collect the stuff in there. Some people would just look at that PC and chuck it and not even bother opening the side up because, like, your gut instinct would say, based off the colour and the casing, well, that's a piece of crap. But like you say, sometimes, you open stuff up and you think, oh, well, that is not what it looks like it is. And there's a lot of that happening, I think, because of, the visual, like, medium stuff like Instagram popularizing these weirder, quirkier things. You see things that, fool you, essentially. They look like the old things. I mean, there's a big thing. If you watch, like, the JHS pedal show, they've got like people making really, really boutique and old looking like fuzz pedals. And, seasoned collectors like, Josh Scott and Daniel Danger, they get tripped up occasionally by a new brand. I can't remember the one who makes like the 6 fuzzes in parallel.
Is it Stromer?
It could be, but I'd have to look into it. Stromer sounds right, but there's some good ones if you watch Totally Normal Behavior where they keep trying to up like the amount of fuzzes they have in parallel or in series, however they do it. But that guy who makes them, he was like emulating a vintage look, like to such a degree that he sort of tripped up these veteran collectors where their full thing is being able to know that something's authentic, and that's the thing though, when you do things to that level, somebody might be, going through like some sort of bin and go, well, that's old and rubbish. And you might look and go, no, it's not, it's new. But, also the old rubbish things are often some of the best things you can find as well.
And it's funny when you're talking about like visual identity and then where the companies are based. Like, the thing is like with Dreadbox, what's really bizarre about the pedal series is it all has Japanese kanji characters on them, but the company's from Athens in Greece. So you would think, well, why do all the pedals have kanji written on and Japanese calligraphy?
Because it looks dope.
And then you look and go, well, they're Greece, But it's an aesthetic thing. And, I suppose a lot of people really like the aesthetic visuals that Japan has to offer, like in a lot of different mediums, and you see it seeping into these little things. But like I say, you almost look at it and go, that's cool, really, it's really cool. And then you look and it's like Dreadbox from Athens, Greece, and you go, why is it all in Japanese then? Do you know what I mean? It's like, but it's there because that aesthetically is a choice that they can make that also puts them, like in sort of like a different box visually.
And I suppose though it's no different to like some of the sort of niche subgenres like in vaporwave and future funk, where you look and there's these artists and you think, well, they must be from Asia because everything is screaming. They're remixing city pop and sampling really deep cuts, and there's a lot of Asian culture in the product they put out. And then you look into it, and they're from like Latin America or whatever.
Brooklyn or whatever.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing. I think, there's something about the escapism there as an artist that it has a certain allure of, I don't necessarily want to, use my culture because, for some people, they know their culture. They want to explore a different culture, and it's hard because you get into a weird realm of, is it cultural appropriation? Let's focus on the positives of it. These people are passionate about other people's culture, and certainly as somebody who lives in England, I can see plenty of people who, not from England, who are passionate about British culture. In terms of the visual and the full swinging
or
60s
like
thing,
Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and like the classic rock
Britpop
bands. Yeah.
I can't mix grunge and Britpop up. That would be a crime.
But like, say you have like effects to get us a sort of slightly back on topic. You have effects like the Tube Screamer by Ibanez, and you can buy them in like the mini factor, the normal form factor, and then you have like what you would deem the most desirable version, which is like the Power Series TS10.
I don't believe that is. It's the series before.
Is it the series before?
Yes. No, it's one of the more desirable ones because I believe John Mayer used the TS10 in one of his rigs, but it's the original vintage looking one. So I believe if you look at the new ones, they're in the visual style of the one that's most desirable.
Oh, so yes, and this is like the one after.
Yeah, so this is
the one after.
I believe the reason why the Power Series Tube Screamers, if I'm not getting it all wrong, is more popular is because they're a more affordable version of that one, but they're basically the same circuit, give or take. So it's one of those, but I do think that they're more visually appealing. They're certainly not as retro looking. They definitely look more modern, but I think it's because of John Mayer, I believe, because he used one.
But also, it's interesting because it shares a very similar form factor to a typical Boss pedal, but there's something about having the foot switch offset that instantly changes like the look and the feel of the pedals. And it's just like an aesthetic thing that it doesn't really help. Like, do you know what I mean? It doesn't really make it more usable. It doesn't really do much for the user experience in the way you'd use it live or in a studio. But there's something about just the idea of the TS10 versus the vintage Ibanez TS9.
It's the TS808. I think the TS808 is the one that is the
most desirable.
The most desirable.
But then the other one's like half price range on Reverb as desirable. So it's still
pretty
expensive.
Damn desirable. Like the TS10 Tube Screamer is like £447 on Reverb.
The argument with this is why buy any of these retro versions or older versions when you can just go on a site like Gears Music or GAC and just buy the latest 50 quid one or 90 quid one or whatever.
I mean, essentially, this is getting back into the idea of being a collector, because if you want the sound, you just buy the TS Mini. Like it does the thing. It does it. Fine.
Yeah.
I've got a TS Mini because Tube Screamers aren't necessarily my like go-to as a guitar player, but I wanted one, like a proper one, just to be able to go to it and try it out because, they are very popular for a reason. But if you just want to try a Tube Screamer, get like a TS Mini because they're like 90 quid. I can't remember how much.
Instead of paying like 447 for the 80s TS10 or even worse, £797, we're looking on Reverb for context. For the vintage Ibanez TS808 Tube Screamer. Like you say, they all essentially have the same sound, very similar typology. What would you call it?
Topology.
Topology. There we go. I was going to say typology.
You caught me off guard, and I had to think. I was like, "What is it?" Yeah, topology. Topology, for those who don't know, is the essence of the circuit. So, like, a Tube Screamer has like a topology, and most chipsets, so say like a chorus that is a Bucket Brigade that's the topology, the Bucket Brigade chorus, and everybody does a similar stuff for the most part, give or take, because that chipset is designed to be used a certain way. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about topology. So you can have Ibanez Tube Screamer, and then you can have the Behringer Tube Screamer, and you can have, say, Keeley or Vertex Effects' Tube Screamers, and they all follow the same basic topology being that's the sound that gets you into the realms of it being a tube screamer, and then say the Vertex one might have 3-band EQ and somebody else might swap some diodes out, and that's the main difference. Like, you know, if you pick up two pedals and they're both tube screamers but they're by different brands, and you go, well, this one sounds different to me. Could just be one different component, and that might be the thing that makes it sound different. And yeah, it sounds different, but the actual core of the circuit might be almost identical.
Or in the worst, where you just think it sounds different because you're looking at it, and if you was doing a blind test, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, which they have done on the JHS show with like budget versions of legacy pedals that have wild price differences, and it's very difficult for experts who know pedals to even pick out which one's which, because at the end of the day, your eyes can deceive you, and you can think, well, I know my trusty distortion, whatever, and then somebody can record a song, you can say, are you using that pedal I like? And they can be like, no, I'm using a 20 quid Behringer one. You know?
Oh, I'm using, God forbid, software. And some people
software,
like,
yeah.
That blows people's minds. Oh, well, I'm using Guitar Rig. And they're like, what? How can you be using Guitar Rig? It sounds so good. I'm like, well, yeah, Guitar Rig sounds ace. It sounds amazing. I mean, I've got Guitar Rig 7 now, isn't it? Guitar Rig 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is Guitar Rig 7. I'm trying to remember. And I've got like a orange valve amp, and Guitar Rig, you know, doesn't sound exactly the same, but in the context of a mix, which is what everybody always says on all the proper, when you're getting really into the nitty gritty of gear, people start to go, well, in the context of a mix, you can't tell the difference. And that's because, you know, audio engineers, if they do a mix, they're probably going to high pass it, they're going to compress it, they're going to squeeze it down and, you know, take a lot of maybe the body that is the actual thing you would notice in the room with your guitar amp. That all just gets mixed out most of the time. So when it comes down to it, you know, the main difference between Guitar Rig and, say, an actual tube screamer might be the fact that Guitar Rig at Native Instruments, they've thought, well, let's cut the crap that the engineer's going to take out. So when it hits the song, it's like partially mixed. And that's going to be the main difference in the room. But in the mix, that probably might make Guitar Rig sound better. You know, I'm being very general when I say this, but, you know, that can be the main difference between the software and the hardware. You know, the software's trying to get you more to the end goal, maybe.
But also it's interesting with software how a lot of them emulate the old Neve racks or mix consoles, and they emulate, like, even on Guitar Rig, you know it's a tube screamer just by looking at it. Yeah. You don't even have to read the text on it. They've got the right shade of green. They've got white writing on it. They've just got it. It's all the same. And they do that with all the stuff, because some of these sounds and effects have an identity, because it's like when they say that some people think certain effects should have a certain color. That is imparted by, oh, well, I use Boss, and Boss have blue choruses, therefore choruses sound blue to me
100%,
because of the association.
Yeah,
and that's what gets people to use the products. And do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just these silly little things that are trivial to people who don't look at them, but it's one of those things where this is all just branding and identity. It's like, you hear a sound, you think a color, you think of the box if you're really into pedals.
Yeah,
and that, you know, that's how branding works, and that's how some of these companies are able to stay afloat. And, you know, that's the reason why some companies can launch very cutting edge pedals, even like the Hot Tone ones to an extent. Crazy how good they are for the price, because they was made to be a budget line, but obviously they can be taken as slightly gimmicky. And obviously some people don't like tiny pedals, some people don't like non-American made or non-home made pedals,
non-Japanese made as well.
Yeah,
that's a popular
it's
one.
Like people will look at two Boss pedals and say, I want the silver screw one from Japan for double the money.
Yeah, and you're like, it's the same. It's the same
thing, but you can see a visual representation of the silver screw. So it's just that sort of thing with pedals, and that can make or break pedal ranges or full companies. Just that, it's like, what is tying you as a customer to that brand? What's desirable about it? Is it the form factor? Is it the company's legacy itself? Or is it the fact that you know it's made by somebody, you know, and it's local? Because for some people, it's just local.
Sometimes it's just like, well, John Mayer uses it, or Eddie Van Halen used, say, MXR, and that can be the thing that gets you as a consumer involved. You know, I definitely think, would people necessarily buy Boss if there was no guitarist that really used them? No. And I mean, in a hypothetical world where they're always sold well, but nobody like massive used a Boss pedal. But when you look at Boss, Prince's board, all Boss, you know, a lot of people like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, they have Boss pedals in their rigs, or at least in their heydays, like of them breaking out, they did.
Boss as a brand is tried and tested, a bit like how Shaw's SM57s and 58s live. They're tried and tested in the studio. People can rely on them because everybody uses them. It's a bit like Canon cameras. You know, it's the go-to, you know, and you can't go wrong if you get what everybody else is using.
So that was a bit of a detour from our regular music programming and more into the gear side, which we always like to talk to, and we do talk about from occasion to occasion. But what do you think? Do you think that it really matters what brand it is? Do you think the looks matter? Do you think that software or hardware have any perceivable gain, like in a production sense? We all know that software is like quicker, hardware can be more inspiring, but what do you think?
Yeah, let us know in our Q&As and polls, and see you next week.
See you next week. Thanks for listening.